Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Johnson, and I'm going to be talking to you about how to stop binge eating. I am a coach and a psychologist, and someone who has recovered completely from binge eating. And I suffered myself with this issue for 8 years, for the better part of 8 years, a little off and on. And if you're there, or if you know people who are there and they're really suffering in this, I know that it feels very hopeless. It can feel very hopeless. It's a very confusing, widely misunderstood affliction. And we're going to talk about that and kind of shed some light on some of the misunderstandings in this. But know that if you're very confused about what the heck is going on, again, with yourself or your loved ones, I was too. It makes absolutely no sense. It's a very strange set of behaviors, but when you see it in a different way, it's actually very simple, and there is so much hope for you. There's so much hope for anyone to recover from this or anything, in my opinion, just by really kind of seeing it in a deeper way and really kind of seeing what's underneath it and getting beyond the behaviors and looking at kind of what comes before the behaviors. So this issue that we're talking about, binge eating disorder, we'll call it. There are conservative numbers that say about 3% of the population struggles with. I think again, I think those are very conservative. I think that's even more, but that's millions of people. Even just 3%, 4% of the population, it's millions of people. And we've heard so much about other eating disorders, and actually there are more people now diagnosed with binge eating disorder than anorexia or bulimia. So it is the most prevalently diagnosed eating disorder, and I still think because it is kind of new on the scene, and it's different from those other ones in a lot of ways, it's very widely misunderstood. It's easy for it to look like it's about willpower, or a lack of willpower, more accurately, or that it's about a lack of discipline, or that the fix is a food plan or a diet, or even for some people it looks like the fix is going into years of therapy and talking about how you've always thought about food since you were a kid, or like what your parents did to you when you were young. And there's help in everything. Like, it's not that some of those things can't be helpful, but what I really hope to share today is a sort of simple description of this, and just discussion about it, as much as one person can have a discussion, just a way of kind of just boiling it down to something that makes it look a little more simple. And that, again, if you or someone that is struggling with this, that it just gives you something new, some new perspective and new way of seeing this, and really helps you to kind of just turn in the right direction. Like this short half-hour class is not a substitute for therapy, but it can, if you're looking this way, feeling I'm stuck, there's no way out, I don't know what to do, what's wrong with me, it's like I just want to take your shoulders and kind of just point you in the other direction, just so that you can see, like, there is hope out there, and there's a lot of stuff that you can start to think about, that can be really helpful. So the first thing that I want to say about this, kind of the first big idea when it comes to binge eating disorder, is that this, and really any disorder or issue that we have, in a sense, it sounds really nuts, but it's kind of a sign, I think, of your innate health and your innate well-being. So all of us, underneath whatever we're suffering from, we're healthy. We have clarity. It's just like when you were born, you didn't know, no one's born binge eating. No one's born with anxiety, or like a lot of the other kind of more emotional and mental things that people suffer from as we grow up. We're born with kind of a clean slate, and we just take life as it comes for the first few years of our lives until we get kind of socialized into worrying and thinking about things so much. But, that wellness that was there with you when you were little is still there. It doesn't go anywhere. It can't go anywhere. And what happens is that, all this other stuff that we sort of deal with through life, it's just kind of like weather. I just look at it like it's like weather. And it's, the sun's still there, the blue sky is still there, no matter what weather's going on. I mean, the nature, the fundamental core nature of you as a human being is still health and wellness and clarity and peace of mind, no matter what, all the time. It's just that we all get all kinds of weather. And when we get all kinds of weather, sometimes we don't really know what to do with it. And binge eating, again, like any habit or addiction really, is in the moment, it's our best attempt to just soothe ourselves, to feel better. And once we, as we'll talk about this more, but once we kind of innocently, not unintentionally sort of teach our brain that when we eat large quantities of food, we feel good, then when you feel bad, that comes to mind. It's like a strategy that just gets kind of wired in there. So I really want you to just start to look at this as a symptom of just feeling a bunch of stuff, and it's human. The stuff you feel is not like your disease or your disorder or that there's something wrong with you. What you're feeling is human stuff, and you are dealing with it and coping with it in the absolute best way that you can. When you feel bad, you want to soothe yourself. And somewhere along the line, binge eating became a way to soothe yourself. So just that in itself is kind of a flip, to really, really see, like, all right, I'm not too far gone. Like, you can't be too far gone. It's impossible. You're just caught in a lot of weather. And kind of an idea that stems from that then, like big idea number 2 is that, we're always doing the best that we can, always. So again, when we feel all that weather and we don't know what to make of it, we don't know what else to do with it, we do what comes to mind for us. And unfortunately, because we're so focused on the outside world, our eyes point out there instead of in toward us. This is like what we see, we have this really rich, complex physical environment in which we live and all this sensory data, and we're just kind of taught to focus outward. And so we start to look out there, even just as a little kid, when you don't feel great or when you're bored, like my kids are bored all the time. Well, what can I do? I have to do something. You're always looking out there for like the fix. And so somewhere along the line, we don't feel so great and we look out there for a fix. And that's where these habits and addictions come from. And again, it's not a fix on like a real issue. It's not a real problem. It's that we just don't always feel like ourselves, and we need a little comfort sometimes, and as human beings we don't always get that sort of self-correcting. Like it's normal for us to have this range of emotions. Everyone has it, and it will come and go. But when we don't really know that, we sort of freak out a little bit when we don't feel good, so we turn to things out there to help us feel better. So at some point, we turn to, in this case, maybe you had a binge. For a lot of people, what starts this is a period of restriction, a period of dieting. And that's not everyone, but for a lot of people, it's that feeling of deprivation and restriction that often comes from dieting, that can just come from being hard on yourself. It can just come from being really just really wanting to be perfect and get things right. And, all this normal, totally normal human stuff that we go through. It just kind of reaches a peak. And at one point you do something that really helps, like binge eating in this case, especially if you're starving and you've been dieting for weeks or months, you eat a bunch of food. It feels really great. You're not putting all this pressure on yourself anymore. And your brain is flooded with all of these feel-good chemicals that say, yay, she's actually doing something good for herself. He's actually feeling good for once. He hasn't felt good in a long time. And that clicks. And because, again, we're so wired to feel good, like that's our natural state, anything that kind of gives us that is going to be a little sticky, and it's going to kind of catch on and stick. And that's exactly how this tends to start. And so I hope just even in those first 2 big ideas, just kind of looking at this less as a problem and less about, oh, I have this thing with food. Then the thing with food is a symptom of something that truly really isn't a problem. It definitely can feel like a problem, but it's sort of a symptom of like the uneasiness, the uneasiness and the just kind of general emotions and ups and downs that humans feel, that in the best you could do, we don't necessarily know better. We're always doing the best we can do. You turn to something that helps you feel better, and it kind of stuck. And so that's just kind of what this is at its core. Big idea number 3 is that it's not about willpower, has nothing to do with willpower or discipline. It's really just about an understanding. I think this is so important because it really can look like this, again, is an issue about food or an issue about your behavior and your behavior around food. And certainly those are the most notable aspects, right? When you're in the middle of a binge, it sure as heck looks like it's about food, where food is playing a big role in it. But think back to, what we've said already, just about kind of how food is the symptom of this. It's what occurs to you in the moment. It's what looks like the way to feel better in the moment. And for some people, yes, there is a history of kind of, deprivation and dieting and all kinds of stuff wrapped up in there. And in that way, it is about food to some extent. But it has nothing to do with you not being able to just not do it. It has nothing to do with a lack of discipline or anything like that. And in fact, it's the opposite. I mean, really, a lot of people who suffer from this issue and other eating disorders as well are extremely successful in other areas of their life. They're very organized and very high achieving. So it really has nothing to do with those things. And because it has nothing to do with the lack of willpower is not going to be the thing that kind of helps you through it. And I think that's super important. And you're going to see as we talk more about kind of how the brain comes into all of this, why that's so important. Because what happens is we start to think, okay, I need something else to fix this. I need to just be stronger. I need to tell myself no, or I'm not going to do it. And almost, when we go in and do those things and we use all this willpower and discipline, it can almost make it worse. It's, the problem is that the core problem is that we have all this pressure. Our minds are going really quickly and we have all this pressure we're putting on ourselves. And so telling yourself, well, just don't do it, and you're really going to stop, and this has really got to be the end of this, it's just adding more pressure. It really is just kind of compounding the problem. So it's so important to see that and to start to just best you can, feel some compassion for yourself and just see, even if you can't muster compassion at this point, just see that, okay, the willpower, the discipline, this last diet, this is going to do it. They haven't worked so far. And if they haven't worked so far, it's worth it to look in a different direction. So let's talk a little bit about the brain, very simply, in a very simple way, and how it kind of feeds into this, and how I really see this as a brain wiring issue in a lot of ways. Big idea number 4 is that you're hijacked. You feel hijacked by your habit. So the lower brain, is a part of our brain that keeps us alive. It's all about our survival, fight or flight, very primitive. It very picks up on patterns and conditioning and that kind of stuff really easily. So it's not logical, it's not reasonable, but it notices when you do something over and over again. And because it's all about your survival, it sort of assumes, okay, maybe they need this thing. This is kind of part of what's going on for this person. So what happens is that you binge at some point. And again, your brain is flooded with all of these feel-good chemicals, and your lower brain remembers that. It's looking out for your survival, and it knows that helped you and made you feel good in that moment. It's kind of started there. And so your lower brain, which again is not, it is not logical, it cannot think, it's not intelligent, it's just a machine that emits what it thinks, not what it thinks because it can't think, but it emits what it knows to emit. It gets into these patterns, starts putting out these urges to binge, and that's when you start to feel kind of hijacked. So I think everyone who's suffered with this knows that feeling, or really anyone who's had any kind of addiction or habit probably knows that feeling when you're fine and suddenly it's like you're possessed. You can't think of anything else. You have to go get your fix. And it really is such a scary feeling, and it's such a feeling of being completely out of control and feeling powerless, and it doesn't feel good. But so what's happening in those moments is that your lower brain is putting out urges to binge, and in doing the absolute best you can, and with some misunderstanding about how this all works, act on them because you're suffering. It's not a good feeling. And you also know that as soon as you binge, it's going away. As soon as you get that drug in you and get into that habitual kind of behavior with it, your mind does slow down. It does calm down. Guilt and shame are going to chime in a little bit, but for that short period of time, it slows things down and it kind of helps you feel better. So it is a reasonable strategy if you look at it that way. And so every time your lower brain puts out these urges to binge and you doing the best you can act on them, you strengthen that. You kind of show the lower brain, yeah, this is works. Keep doing this, this feels good. Now, there's another part of your brain. I mean, again, there's many parts of your brain, but just to chop it in half, the other half of your brain is the higher brain. That's much more complex and intelligent, and that's kind of what we associate more with our personality and who we are and our preferences and decisions and all of that good stuff. So your higher brain actually is what is in charge of you making a decision, and it's also where you kind of have the coordinated muscle movements to do things, to make those, to act on things. And so what's really strange is that it's like your lower brain is putting out these urges saying, feed me, feed me. And if you feel hijacked, it kind of feels like it's taking over. But actually your higher brain is in there too, kind of listening to the lower brain. Your higher brain's like, all right, well, lower brain's really adamant. We don't know what else to do. Let's do it, right? So it does it. But that higher brain where there's a part of you and there is a decision being made, that's necessary. They have to work in tandem. The lower brain in and of itself is powerless. All it can do is scream at you and put these urges out. It's not in charge of your muscles walking you to the refrigerator. It cannot pull out your credit card to buy food. It cannot do any of that. So there is a way in which, because your higher brain kind of is just duped by the lower brain, doesn't really, it doesn't know it has a choice, it falls for it over and over again. And again, that strengthens that in your lower brain and just tells your lower brain to keep these urges coming. So the huge insight here is kind of seeing that lower brain, it can go nuts, and it absolutely will, and it can give you all kinds of horrible experience. But if your higher brain starts to be onto it and isn't duped by it, you can wait. And if you don't, and we'll talk about how you don't, but if you were to not act on those urges, they would stop coming around, because there's nothing that your lower brain can scream over and over again that, if it's not somehow acted on or given a lot of attention or focus, is going to just keep going for life. It just doesn't work that way. It gets fed, and when it stops getting fed, it quiets down. It's like, I like to say, it's like a stray cat. So your lower brain's like this stray cat that, like, if you feed the stray cat, it's going to keep coming around. As soon as you quit feeding it, it's going to come around for a little bit longer, but it's going to catch on pretty quickly and go find someone who's going to feed it. So it's all about kind of, seeing with your insight and, higher brain, if you want to call it that. I'd like to call it even something bigger than your brain. I think just seeing with our wisdom and having an insight about how this all works that shows you that you don't have to give in to all the lower brain stuff, and that when you don't, this all really reverse. So big idea number 5 is that those urges are temporary, and this is really kind of huge. Every experience we have, everything is fleeting, temporary. Like there's no human experience you've ever had, no emotion, no thought, nothing that's lasted your whole life. Like you've never been stuck in anything as much as you felt like you were. We're constantly being refreshed and getting new stuff. Like it's impossible to actually be stuck in anything. And urges are no different. Now, it feels harder because they're very, very uncomfortable, and they can be, especially when we don't have this understanding. So if you have no clue what's going on, suddenly you're completely hijacked. You feel like you're completely hijacked by your lower brain, and it's forcing you to eat all this stuff that you don't really want to eat. That's a horrible feeling. As you start to wake up to what's actually going on, seeing that this is just the lower brain putting out these signals, asking, demanding what it needs, but that temporary, you don't have to give in to them, it starts to change a little bit. And it changes in a way where, it still may be there, the urges are still there, but there's just a bigger part of you that knows that it's not going to last forever, and you don't have to act on it to make it go away. And so the lower brain, some people call it the inner lizard, or like the reptilian brain, because reptiles have it, so they call it the inner lizard. And I like to think of like this lizard that has no arms, no legs, but a really big mouth. And it's just like screaming at you, feed me, feed me, feed me. And it has no arms and no legs. So as soon as and it's going to lose its voice. It cannot scream at you forever, and it cannot give you that emotion forever. So there's something about just seeing, oh, this thing I'm experiencing, you almost get to just kind of watch the show, like, and not that it's a pleasant show again, but like you're able to relate to it, be with it in a different way to where it doesn't totally consume you because you kind of know more about what it is. And it helps you over time, or sometimes for people instantly when they kind of hear this, to just be with it a different way and not give into it all the time. Even giving into it less is going to start to weaken that in your brain. It's going to start to weaken that wiring in your brain. And your brain will start to change to where it just doesn't give you these urges in the same way. So it's really, really exciting for people as they start to see, that these urges, like, they don't have to give into it. Even if they feel really hijacked, there is a way in which they can kind of let run its course. And that when they do that, it really does start to fade without them giving into it. Because I know when I was there, I would have never thought that was the case. Even though it's so logical, it makes sense. It's still, in the moment, it doesn't feel like it. It really feels like the only thing you could do to make this urge go away is to feed it, to give it what it wants. So I would have thought, to say, oh, well, just don't do it. That would have been like white knuckling, right? Like willpower, and like, I'm not going to do it. And like we said, that kind of feeds the lower brain. That, that talking back to it and getting in there with it, like, that's not particularly helpful because it gives a lot of attention to these urges. What is helpful is having a bigger insight about it and seeing that it's powerless. It truly is, as much as it might suck, it's powerless and it can't hurt you, and it's temporary. And then, you just start to not feel like you need to give into it quite so much. And at some point you just don't. And if you don't, it starts to rewire and change. So big idea number 6 is that action and attention are not helpful. And that's kind of what I just sort of talked about a little, and I think it's just really helpful to see this in maybe even a broader way. So all of our human experience, every thought, every emotion, everything we ever have, every urge, it's like it's designed to be in motion. This is the design of human beings, is that we get a flood of stuff and it does not get stuck. It's not designed to get stuck. So think of it like this river that's like a flowing, kind of rushing river with, like, some decent speed to it. And that's kind of what it's meant to be like to some extent. And if you look at children, they're perfect examples of how this is sort of their experience. So they will love you one minute and hate your guts the next minute. And they'll be so happy one minute and then be like so upset the next minute. And they have a wide range of experience, but it kind of keeps flowing. Like they can't really hold a grudge very easily. Like kids just bounce right back. And so that's true for us as well. It's just that as we get older and we get really attached to our thinking, we start to think about our thinking. So it's kind of like we get in the middle of that river and we have all our big trees with us and our boulders and our logs, and we're creating this log jam in our experience. And we're saying, why am I stuck in this emotion? Why am I stuck in this way of thinking? Why is this urge like getting to me for so long, so much? Well, there's a part of us, that just so innocently is kind of resisting it or getting in there and trying to fix it, or just interfering in our own little subtle innocent way with the natural flow of things. So it's so helpful to see that, and especially in terms of urges and when it comes to things like this, that desire, it's going to well up within you. Your lower brain is programmed to give you these urges to binge eat if you're in the midst of this issue. And so you can count on it. It's going to happen. But it's also going to go away. You can count on that too, because it's never not gone away. And it can look like, well, I have to give into it for it to go away, but you really don't. And the more we start to see that, the more you just are able to play with it. So big idea number 7 is insight changes everything. And I think this, I just really wanted to touch on this again because there are lots of approaches and different schools of thinking about this. And everything can be helpful to different people at different times. Different people are going to hear something helpful in anything that's out there. And so that, that's wonderful. It's wonderful in that way that gives you permission to just gravitate toward the people or the stuff, the way of talking about this that really just, resonates with you, and know that you're going to, most likely get something out of it. And that's wonderful. You don't have to find like the one right answer, because there isn't one. And at the same time, I think what I've seen be really helpful in such a lasting, like deep way, is to have some kind of bigger insight about what's going on here, and sometimes staying really in the behavior, which is kind of downstream. Again, we have this whole thing where we don't feel well and we want to like soothe ourselves, and all of this stuff's going on. And then we pick this one little way that's kind of arbitrary, really, like why one person binge eats and why another person drinks, or another person shops, or another person, overworks or whatever. We don't know. Like, it's a little bit arbitrary, but they're all essentially the same, but we tend to get really bogged down in the behavior. And one person has a food problem, another person has an alcohol problem, and I think it's just so helpful to back up a little bit. And yes, you're going to think about your food, and, all of that's going to happen. You're going to get all into the behaviors. I did. Everyone does. But if you just can kind of back up and take this bigger picture view, of kind of what's happening here, that in a really simplistic way, your brain is very innocently been programmed to give you these urges. These urges come and go. If you do nothing, they will go away. They will fade on their own. Can really, really change things in a big way. And then it doesn't matter what triggers are around. You don't need to avoid, you might for a while, but it's not like you need to avoid certain foods or avoid certain people that remind you of things. There's such a, seeing it at that deep level gives you so much freedom, because it's not about the external circumstances and about rearranging your life to like give you the perfect conditions that make you not want to binge. It's about knowing that when you have an urge to binge, you do not have to act on that, and it will go away. That is power and freedom that, that's where it's at, I think. Big idea number 8 is around patience and presence. And again, like, we have this innate nature. We have this default state that everyone's in, no matter what you're suffering from. We have moments of just really feeling like we feel like ourselves, and we're comfortable with who we are, and we feel like it's kind of like home base, And then we have moments when the weather comes in, when we have a huge storm and all kinds of weather, good and bad weather, it's just crazy stuff going on, and we feel that too. And what's really fascinating in a way is that when we're in our home base place, which just happens for us all the time, you may not spend hours and days and weeks there on end, but you're there. If you just notice, like, you have moments of it. When we're there, it doesn't occur to you to binge eat. Like, it's just not even on your mind. And then when the weather comes in, it is on your mind. But I think that's really profound. Like, that there is a state of mind that you have right now. Maybe you've been thinking of yourself as disordered or having this disease or whatever. Even in the midst of that, there is a state of mind that you kind of just naturally fall into from time to time when this does not even occur to you. It just does not feel like the thing to do. And that's because that's your kind of home. And so to start to think of it like that, like, okay, well, this is my home base. This is who I really am. And then when this weather comes in, this habit flares up and this stuff, but even just looking at it like that, like, it really gives you a sense of your true nature and how resilient you really are, and how untouched by this you kind of are, because the weather does what the weather does, but it always comes and goes, and it always changes. And that's really nice. And so there's something about just being patient and knowing that that's coming, and being present as much as possible, that when we're present in the moment, we just, we feel good. And if we don't feel good, we have wisdom and common sense and all of these wonderful things that just help us, help point us in a direction that's going to be self-soothing. Big idea number 9 is the truth about setbacks. Basically, let me just say this very simply. They do not matter whatsoever. And if you are trying to get over any kind of habit or addiction, especially binge eating, but anything really, you are going to mess up. You are going to have times when you just can't do it, when you know better and you just fall into it, or you're having a bad day, and before you know it, half your refrigerator's empty, and you wake up to it. And you wake up to it when you do. And you're always going to wake up to it because remember, nothing's permanent. So at some point, like, yes, we hope you wake up to it sooner. And sometimes you will wake up to it sooner. But sometimes you're going to wake up to it a little bit later. And that's okay too, because the point is you've woken up. You leave it behind you and you move on. And I know this is so cliche and everyone, talks about this. It probably is like the most important thing in this because everyone has, again, you have those moments when you just have an insight, you see through it, or you dismiss an urge and you feel really great about yourself. And then maybe 5 minutes later, it's different. And it's so easy to make something of that. And so, I think the only potential problem and a setback that could possibly be is that if you decide to make it mean something, if you say, well, this means I can't do it, or this means I need to start over, or whatever you might decide, you're deciding that and it's not really true. So really, setbacks, par for the course. It's just part of the process, completely meaningless. Big idea number 10 is just kind of a closing point that I want to make about lifelong recovery. So for me personally, like I said, I've, struggled with this issue for many years. It's been several years now behind me, which is amazing, very nice. Before that, I had some anxiety issues and had an anxiety disorder when I was in graduate school. They were very similar in a lot of ways, and that a lot of the traditional wisdom was kind of saying that, like, this is sort of who you are in a sense. I was sort of told in both cases that, well, yeah, we can hopefully stop your panic attacks. We can hopefully stop your major binges, but you're probably going to have issues with food for the rest of your life. You're probably going to be a little anxious for the rest of your life. And it looks like something that, to just sort of resign to and learn to cope with. And I can't stress enough how neither of those are true and how grateful I am that that's not true today. That there is nothing to cope when you see the truth of this and really just start to see it at a different level, like just take a different look at it, and a look that is higher up, I think, in a way. Oh, that sounds a little hierarchical. I don't mean it like that it's better or worse than anything else, but just almost like a bird's eye view of what's really going on here and how your brain is just innocently, random, so meaninglessly putting off these signals that you don't have to listen to. And it starts to kind of change it for you. And this isn't a lasting personality trait that's going to stick with you for life necessarily. I mean, it certainly hasn't for me. I'm shocked every day at what a non-issue food is in my life. I just don't care. It's just so easy. And anxiety as well. It just isn't there, and it doesn't have to be for you either. You can completely leave this behind. And you don't have to. Like, you can also, it's okay if you haven't yet. There is a process, and it's different for everyone, totally different for everyone. But just know that there is a lot of hope, and hopefully some of these ideas that we've talked about just kind of, help you sort of look at it in a somewhat different way. It's not about a diet or another fix or another behavioral strategy. It's really about just looking at this, and I truly believe in anything, that this can actually be good for you. Like, I can now, years later, look back and say, wow, like, I learned so much from this. This was like a pathway to see what I actually needed, like what I really needed to know about soothing myself, what I truly needed to know about how to just be back at that home base as much as possible and live a calm, comfortable life. And I don't know that I would have gotten that stuff without these issues. And that's my hope for you, is that someday you say, wow, that was awesome that I had that. Well, I mean, you recover from it, and you go on with your life, and you say it or you don't say it, but it's very possible that you might. And hopefully this has been helpful to you. And please, if you want to reach out, there's so many things that you can do. You can reach out to me. You can reach out. There's so many people out there that know a lot about this, because there are a lot of people suffering. So hopefully that's helpful.